In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the different types of polar graph shapes. Now, there are some that are more common than others, some more basic ones. Just like any graph, you can get some really intricate ones, but I'm going to show you some very typical polar graph shapes. So the first one that we have right here, we call this a rose, and you can have a rose with several petals. So this one has 3, right? It doesn't really actually look like a rose like what you've actually seen in real life, but we do call that shape a rose, and we just graphed one that had 4 petals, and this one has 3. So those are really cool. We see things like that in actual flowers in the real world. The next one that we have kind of looks like the infinity sign. It's called a lemniscate, and we can have different variations of it. Obviously, they can be a little bit more stretched or a little fuller. All different sorts of variations can happen with it. One that's really, really common, and we're actually going to be exploring it a little bit more next week, is this one down here, which is called a cardioid. All right, so you can see that this one and the next one actually look pretty similar, but one difference is that we actually have a point right here where it doesn't loop. So this one loops, and a cardioid does not. This actually has a lot of applications, especially with sound and microphones and things like that. And the very last one, this is actually a French word, so I'm not French, so I'm going to butcher it a little bit. If you're taking French class, you probably can pronounce it much better than I can, but it's a limaçon, and that one looks like a cardioid, but it does have that loop. And there are also many variations of that shape as well. I'm going to show you some different examples and some really cool ones that are not as basic as these, but are polar graphs, and sometimes they are the culmination of many polar graphs, or just some really intricate equations. So let's take a look at the next one. Here you can see this is actually a circle, so you might be thinking, what's the connection with all the conics that we just went over and polar graphs? Well, you can see that a circle is actually also considered a shape on polar graphs, so we have that there. We also have a cardioid, and again, this one's interesting because it really looks like a cardioid, yet they're calling it a one-loop limaçon. So we have this shape again. Here we go. So we have some familiar ones again. We see a couple variations of the rose. Archimedes spiral, that's another one that is pretty common as well. So that one is interesting. Next, well, we already saw some like that, so let's skip to the next one. Here we go. I'm sorry it's a little blurry. I blew it up a little bit to make it bigger for you to see. You can try to plug this into your calculator if you want. It actually uses this value e, and it has cosine theta in the exponent, which is interesting. But it makes a cool kind of sideways butterfly shape. So have fun plugging that into your calculator and exploring that a little bit. I'm sure you can probably change some of the values and create some of your own cool images. Here's another example. I unfortunately don't have the equation for it. This, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a couple of different polar equations, although it certainly might be just one because they can get pretty complex. But another pretty cool image that comes from polar graphs or polar equations. All right, and here's just a bunch. A lot of these are just variations of roses. I don't know if you guys ever did this when you were younger, but there's like a spirally kind of like art kind of game, I guess you could call it, where you could put your pencil in a stencil and you just kept circling it around and around and around, and it ended up creating spirals like this. Maybe you guys used it to play, maybe not. I definitely did when I was younger, so maybe I'm definitely aging myself. But if you guys have ever, or if you know what I'm talking about, you'll find these kinds of shapes pretty familiar, but these are all interesting as well. And then the last one, here's a pretty complex one. You can see the equation down here. If you'd like, you can certainly put that into your calculator and take a look at the way that it traces itself on the graphing calculator. So we can get some really intricate shapes, and they're really I think they're really cool to look at. But I would encourage you guys to explore some of your own equations on your graphing calculator. If you end up getting a really cool one, I would encourage you guys to take a picture of it if you can, and send it to me, and I would love to share some with the class. If you can find some really cool ones. I've done this with classes before, and it can be kind of addicting. You can start using several equations, and it gets really interesting, the different shapes and even the different colors that you can use in your graphing calculator, and you can create some really great stuff. So have a little bit of fun with it, and enjoy.